Ladies and gentlemen, young and old, I came here today with a fire in my bones and a word in my heart. There's a war out there, and it's not just fought with fists or weapons of spirit and spirit. It's fought in the heart. It's fought in the quiet moments when no one else is watching. And in this battle, you cannot be soft. You cannot be lukewarm. You cannot be polite with your purpose. You've got to become a savage. I don't mean reckless. I don't mean cruel. I mean fierce in purpose, unyielding in truth, and undaunted by fear. Too many are trying to tame you. The world wants to box you in, dress you up, calm you down, keep you passive, polite, predictable. But deep down, you were made to break the chains, to shatter the silence, to run wild with courage. A savage refuses to bow to the odds of this age. A savage does the sage. A savage doesn't seek comfort. They seek calling. A savage isn't worried about fitting in. They're worried about rising up. Where are the ones who will say, I don't care what the world says. I will stand for truth. Where are the warriors who will fight for what's right, even if they stand alone? You were not made to blend in. You were made to stand out. You were not made to retreat. You were made to advance. Some of you have fallen. Some of you are scarred. Some of you are scarred. Some of you have been told you're too much, too loud, too radical. Good. Let me tell you, God does his greatest work through the ones who refuse to stay down, through the ones who rise from the ashes with fire in their eyes. A savage loves with passion, believes without apology, forgives with fire, and keeps going even when the world says stop. So I ask you tonight, will you become a savage? Will you walk boldly in your purpose? Will you speak with fire in your belly and truth on your lips? Will you live like the chains are already broken? Because they are. Don't play small when you were born to shake the ground. Don't whisper when your voice was made to roar. Now is the time. This is the hour. Become a savage and never look back. A savage refuses to be tamed by the world because deep in their bones they know they were never made to bow down to the noise, to the culture that changes like the wind, to the voices that try to shape them into something easier to control, something softer, something quieter, something that fits neatly into a box. But the savage breaks the box, burns the script, and walks boldly into the wilderness of purpose. Let their eyes set like flint and their soul ignited with something this world can't define and certainly can't contain. A savage hears the lies of the ones that say sit down, calm down, be realistic, be safe, be manageable, and laughs in the face of that narrative because they know that conformity is death to the soul and compromise is slow poison. And they refuse to dress themselves in costumes of comfort when they were born to wear the armor of truth, soaked in grit, glory, and conviction that cannot be negotiated. A savage sees the chains people wear proudly, chains of fear, of status, of fake smiles, and shallow living. And instead of joining the crowd, they tear those chains off, not just for themselves, but for anyone close enough to hear the sound of their rebellion. The holy defiance that says, I am not for sale, I am not for show, I am not here to impress, I'm here to awaken, disrupt, and rise. A savage doesn't wait for permission to live boldly because they already carry the authority within them. Authority that isn't handed out by titles or followers or approval ratings, but authority that comes from knowing exactly who they are, whose they are, and what fire runs through their veins. A fire that won't go out, a flame the world didn't start and therefore can't extinguish. A savage walks into rooms and shifts the atmosphere not because they're loud, but because they're real. And realness carries weight that no trend can mimic, no mask can replicate, no algorithm can measure. Because authenticity is magnetic. It draws the broken, the hungry, the silent screamers who've been waiting for someone, anyone, to be bold enough to live loud on purpose. A savage doesn't run from the wilderness because they know the wilderness is where the wild ones find their strength. It's where clarity comes through the chaos. It's where the voice of truth drowns out the voices of culture. And it's where the savage sharpens their soul like a blade, preparing not just to survive the world, but to cut through its noise with precision, with courage, and with a roar. A savage cannot be domesticated by comfort, by applause, by shiny distractions, because they have seen what lies behind the curtain. They've seen the emptiness that hides behind success without substance, fame without faith, and beauty without backbone. And they've made a vow not to trade their fire for acceptance, not to surrender their edge for safety, not to silence their purpose for peace that doesn't last. A savage refuses to be tamed because deep down they know they carry something holy, something eternal, And to try to tame that is to insult the very breath that made them, the very scars that shaped them, the very calling that chases them through every season, through every season. Untamed, unshaken, and undeniably alive, not perfect, not polished, but powerfully, dangerously, beautifully savage. The savage walks in truth and power because they have tasted the emptiness of lies, the hollowness of pretending, the cold weight of compromise, and they have made the decision to never again trade their authenticity for acceptance, to never again dim their light for approval, to never again wear a mask just to fit into rooms where truth has no oxygen and power is nothing more than an illusion built on. A savage walks in truth not because it is easy, but because it is necessary, because they know truth will cut before it heals, burn before it blesses, but it will always set them free. And they would rather bleed in truth than breathe in a lie. Would rather be rejected for being real than praised for being fake, because in a world full of mirrors and shadows, the savage stands as a reflection of something unshakable, unchangeable, unafraid. A savage walks in power, not the kind the world worships, loud, showy, but the kind that moves mountains in silence, that tears down strongholds in prayer, that walks through storms with calm in the eyes and steel in the spine, because real power isn't in the noise. It's in the authority that comes from knowing who you are, where you stand, and what kingdom you belong. The savage doesn't waver when the pressure comes, because they've been through fire already. They've walked through betrayal and heartbreak, through loss and loneliness, and came out not weaker but wiser, not bitter but bolder. This pain didn't steal their power, it refined it. Pain didn't shut their mouth, it gave their voice weight, and now every word they speak echoes with the sound of survival and sacred strength. A savage knows truth isn't just something you believe, it's something you live, something you bleed for, something you carry into dark places like a torch that won't go out. And they don't water it down. They don't apologize for it. They don't reshape it to be palatable. Because truth doesn't need makeup to be beautiful, and it doesn't need approval to be eternal. A savage walks in power, not because they feel strong every day, but because they walk anyway, they show up anyway, they speak up anyway. And then their obedience to truth, and their commitment to purpose, and their refusal to quit when it would have been easier to disappear. They find a strength that cannot be stolen, a power that doesn't break when the world pushes. A savage doesn't perform. They possess. They don't chase validation. They carry identity, and the power they walk in doesn't come from being seen, but from being grounded. Doesn't come from applause, but from alignment. Doesn't come from dominance, but from surrender to something greater than self. And that's why they're dangerous, because they don't need the world to approve what heaven already confirmed. The savage walks in truth and power because they know that when the fog of confusion surrounds, when the lies get louder, when the voices of fear try to drown out purpose, the only way to remain unshaken is to stand planted in truth and clothed in power, eyes steady, steps firm, heart burning, soul roaring, not because the path is easy, but because they were born for this fight, and the truth inside them is not up for debate, and the power upon them is not up for negotiation. A savage fights for righteousness, not because it's fashionable, not because it's popular, not because it's easy, but because something deep inside them refuses to settle for the counterfeit comfort of silence, refuses to bow to injustice, refuses to look away, while the world drowns in compromise. Because they know righteousness is not a mood, not a trend, not a performance. It is a war cry. It is a standard. It is a sacred rebellion against everything that tries to twist what is holy into what is tolerable. A savage doesn't wait for applause to stand for truth, doesn't check the temperature of the culture before they speak, doesn't need a platform to take a stand, because righteousness is not about being seen. It's about being right in your spirit, right in your choices, right in your convictions. Even if you have to stand alone, even if the world calls you too intense, too bold, too much, because a savage would rather be hated for standing in the light than praised for dancing in the dark. A savage fights for righteousness because they've seen what happens when people stop fighting, when souls grow numb, when sin gets sanitized and wrong gets rebranded as personal truth. And in the middle of that fog, the savage draws their sword, not of steel, but of spirit. Not to destroy people, but to destroy deception, to cut through the noise, to call the lost back to the line, to shake the sleepers who forgot they were made for more than just surviving. A savage doesn't fight with fists, they fight with faith. They fight with fire in their voice and love in their hands. They fight with eyes locked on eternity and knees that have kissed the ground so often that heaven knows their weight. Because righteousness is not about being perfect. It's about being aligned. It's about saying, I will not bend when truth is on the line. I will not bow when justice is mocked. I will not be silent. while the innocent. A savage fights for righteousness, not from a throne of pride, but from a place of brokenness, from the ashes of their own past battles, from the blood and bruises of mistakes made and mercy found. Because they know righteousness isn't something you earn, it's something you rise toward over and over. And every time the enemy says, "We're not worthy," the savage says, "That's right, but he is, and I fight not for me, but for what he placed inside of me." A savage is dangerous, not because they're angry, but because they're anchored, not because they're flawless, but because they're fearless. And when the world tries to confuse good for evil and evil for good, when gray is the new gospel and comfort is the new king, the savage raises their voice like thunder in the valley and says, "As long as there is breath in my lungs, I will not stand by, I will stand up." A savage fights for righteousness even when it costs them, even when friends walk away, even when doors close, even when they're misunderstood and mislabeled, because they know there is no crown without a cross, no victory without a battle, no real peace without truth. And while the crowd chooses what is easy, the savage chooses what is eternal, because they are not living for likes, they are living for. A savage fights for righteousness because at the end of the day, when the lights fade and the noise dies down, and the stage is empty and the world stops clapping, all that will matter is, did they stand, did they shrink, did they love deeply and live loudly and fight fiercely for what is holy? And if the answer is yes, if they fought the good fight and kept the fire burning, then that savage didn't just lie. A savage chooses purpose over popularity because they understand that applause fades and crowds shift and opinions change with the wind, but purpose is eternal. It is carved into the soul before the first breath was ever drawn. And when the world tries to trade destiny for visibility, when the temptation to be liked outweighs the calling to be loyal, the savage plants their feet and says, "I was not made to entertain, I was made to transform." A savage is not seduced by the spotlight because they know the spotlight can blind and popularity can rot the roots of purpose when you chase the echo of people's approval, instead of the voice that called you in the first place. So they walk away from stages built on sand and run toward altars built on truth, because they'd rather be unknown in heaven's will than celebrated in a counterfeit dream that costs their soul. A savage chooses the narrow road even when the wide one is full of likes and handshakes and shallow praise, because they know purpose requires sacrifice, requires silence, requires seasons of being overlooked and misunderstood. Instead of shrinking, they grow deeper. They dig roots. They prepare in the shadows because they don't need a crowd to validate what God already confirmed in the quiet. A savage isn't moved by metrics or measure marketing tricks because they are not a brand, a movement, a living declaration that obedience is greater than optics and truth is heavier than trends, and they are not here to fit into the culture. They are here to confront it with the kind of purpose that burns through every false platform like wildfire through dry grass. A savage would rather lose followers than lose focus, would rather walk alone with clarity than get carried away by clout, would rather disappoint people than disobey purpose, because their yes was not given to the crowd. It was given to the calling, and they refuse to sell it for a temporary crown made of approval that disappears the moment they stop performing. A savage knows popularity is addictive, seductive, deceptive. It gives you noise but steals your voice, gives you attention but drains your anointing, gives you the feeling of power but leaves you powerless when the real battle comes. So they throw off the need to be seen, to be praised, to be adored, and instead fix their eyes on what is holy and what is true and what is waiting at the end of a life lived without compromise. A savage watches others chase platforms while they chase purpose, sees people build empires while they build altars, hears the world scream of "be successful," while their soul whispers of "be faithful." And though the path is lonely or heart is slower, they walk it anyway because they know eternity isn't impressed by followers. It's shaped by faithfulness, and the savage would rather be remembered in heaven than trending on earth. A savage chooses purpose over popularity because they know the power of their life is not in how many people see them, but in what people see through them, not in their name trending, but in his name lifted, not in their reputation, but in their obedience. And if they must be rejected, mocked, overlooked, or forgotten, so be it, because the savage did not come to win approval, they came to finish the mission. A savage is fierce in love because they know love is not soft, not passive, not sweet background music to a quiet life. It is war, it is a weapon, it is the boldest force on earth that speaks truth when it hurts, that stands in a storm when it's easier to hide, that forgives when it makes no sense and embraces the broken without blinking, because love is not a feeling, It is a fire, and a savage loves so deeply it disrupts darkness and breaks chains that pride and fear have tried to keep locked. A savage loves not with conditions, but with conviction, not with fear of being hurt, but with faith that love is always worth the risk because they are not afraid to look foolish for loving hard, for loving first, for loving loud. Because their love is not manufactured by emotion, it is forged by mercy, powered by grace, and anchored in the truth that they were first loved fiercely, wildly, relentlessly, and now they love like their life depends on it, because someone else's might. A savage's love is fierce because it does not run when it gets hard, does not disappear when wounds show up, does not flinch when betrayal knocks, but leans in closer, speaks softer, and fights harder, because this kind of love isn't cheap, isn't shallow, isn't temporary. It's the kind that washes feet, carries crosses, lays down rights, and risks reputation just to lift one person out of the pit they swore they'd never escape. A savage is fierce in faith because they've walked through the valley and seen too much, felt too much to ever let go of the one who brought them through it all. And now their faith isn't theory. It's war-tested, storm-certified, forged in the fire of waiting, of weeping, of wondering. And yet through it all they still stand, still believe, still speak life over death and truth over lies and light over dark. A savage's faith is not quiet, not pretty. It roars like a lion in the face of despair. It plants its feet when the ground shakes. It shouts prayers that shake the gates of hell, and it whispers promises that bring peace to panic. Because they don't just believe in something nice. They believe in something undeniable, something unshakable, something that holds them up when everything else collapses. A savage doesn't have passive faith. They have wild faith, faith that jumps when it doesn't make sense, faith that gives when it hurts, faith that prays when nothing changes and still praises when everything breaks. Because their faith isn't rooted in what they see. It's rooted in what they know. And they know the one who never left, never lied, never lost. And that's why they won't back down even when the battle looks impossible. A savage walks with fierce love and fierce faith because they know that love without faith becomes empty sentiment, and faith without love becomes cold religion. So they carry both like twin swords, one in each hand, love that melts walls and faith that moves mountains. Love that sees through the mask and faith that speaks to dry bones. Love that reaches the unreachable and faith that believes the impossible. A savage is fierce in love and fierce in faith because they've been forgiven too much to be lukewarm. They've been rescued too deeply to stay silent. And now their heart burns not just to survive, but to awaken, not just to be safe, but to set fires of hope and healing everywhere they go. Because when love and faith collide inside a soul that refuses to bow, what rises up is nothing short of unstoppable. The savage rises after every fall because they've learned that failure is not final, that hitting the ground is not the end of the story, but the start of something deeper, something raw, something real, because when life knocks them down, they don't stay there and curse the dirt. They press their hands into it, they feel the weight of it, and they push themselves back up with the same dirt that tried to bury them now caked into their bones as proof that falling didn't kill them. A savage rises after every fall, not because they are invincible, but because they are committed to the call, to the purpose, to the promise that still stands even when everything else collapses. And instead of letting shame write the next chapter, they rip the pen out of shame's hand and write with scars, with sweat, with stubborn faith that says, this isn't how it ends, not for me, not today, not ever. A savage doesn't pretend they didn't fall. They own it, face it, learn from it, and come back stronger, wiser, wilder, because they know every fall is a classroom and every wound is a teacher. And while others hide their bruises, the savage wears them like armor, like testimony, like proof that they went to war with themselves and walked out still breathing, still swinging, still become. A savage rises because they remember what they carry, what they've survived, what they've seen. And though the enemy tried to break them, betray them, bury them, they rise anyway, not in pride, but in purpose, not in ego, but in endurance. Not with arrogance, but with the quiet fury of someone who knows that grace isn't just what forgives, it's what lifts. A savage doesn't rise because it's easy. They rise because it's necessary, because staying down would be a betrayal of the fire inside. And while others quit for comfort or sit in self-pity, the savage drags their broken pieces in the light, rebuilds what cracked, breathes through the pain, and refuses to let the fall define them when they were made for the fight. A savage rises even when no one cheers, when no one sees, when no one helps, because they are not fueled by fame. They are fueled by fire, by calling, by the unshakable truth that destiny is still alive under the rubble, that hope still whispers even in the silence. That resurrection isn't just a one-time miracle. It's a lifestyle of coming back, coming through, coming. A savage rises after every fall because they know the voice of doubt will scream, the past will accuse, the weight will crush, but still they rise because something inside refuses to die. Something inside still believes, still hopes, still fights, and they don't rise polished. They rise bloody, bruised, limping if they have to, but rising all the same, because rising isn't about how pretty it looks. It's about how powerfully it declares, I'm not done yet. A savage rises after every fall because falling isn't failure when you get up, because every rise is a prophecy, every comeback is a warning to the darkness that it should have taken them out when it had the chance, because now they are awake, alive, and unstoppable, not because they never, but because they always rise.